All right, so yesterday we ended here. I did not have them all filled in. I had them partially filled in. I think this is actually where I left you. And then you were supposed to go in. I think you had time to fill in the rest. We just didn't have time to go over it. So if you can double check yourself here. It should be a pretty easy fill in because remember we've got tons of reflection stuff going on here, right? Once I fill in the first quadrant, I just take those same numbers, they reflect to the other quadrants, and then the signs that side G ends are dependent upon what quadrant we're in, but the absolute value of the number itself is the same, okay? So double check yourself. Some of you are frantically writing because you didn't do what I asked you to do, but whatever. Okay. But get all those in there because I want you to see that, like when I ask you what is the, well, we'll talk about that in just a second. But all right, so I just wanted to make sure you had double checked yourself on this. Now I want you to grab your purple paper and go to this part where we had the tangent values right here. And we're going to look at this blank first quadrant practice here. And we're not going to fill in absolutely everything, so stay with me. We're going to do it a little piece at a time here. So I want you to start with, I'm going to put a 0 here. I just want you to write the angle values in radians right inside the circle and stop. And overall, y'all did very well at that at the door, so I think you've got some way of knowing what's what at this point. I'm going to write them down, but don't just copy mine. Check them when you're done. Get it out of your own little brain without looking at anything. Okay? That's what we should have, right? Everybody good with the angles? Yes? So when I ask you for the angle in radians, that's what it's a pi over something, right? Or it could be the 2 pi over something, but it's got the pi's in it. Those are your angle measures in radians. Okay, so now I want you to fill in the 2 quadrantal ordered pairs at 0 and at pi halves. Fill those 2 in without copying mine or copying anything else you might have in front of you. Hopefully those should be fairly simple at this point, right? But again, also very simple to get backwards. What is the cosine of 0? What's the cosine of 0? 1, because here we are at 0, the x value is 1, right? The sine of 0 is 0. The cosine of pi halves is 0. The sine of pi halves is 1, right? You just have to know where you're thinking about on the circle so you can get the ordered pairs in the right spots. Okay, so now I want you to fill in the other 3 ordered pairs without just copying them from somewhere. Don't look at anything, get it out of your brain. Fill these 3 in. Use the hand trick if you need to. And then double check yourself with me. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you your first quiz on this stuff. And it's going to look just like this did when it was blank. And you got to fill in the stuff we just filled in. Think we can make 100 on that? I think we can. Okay. No, just this. Tomorrow is just this. We'll get to where it's the whole circle. And we are going to talk about the whole circle and some other things today. But we're going to focus most of our time right now just really getting that first quadrant down, because once we do, the rest is a piece of cake. I do still think it's important to show you the relationships along the way, though, so that you understand kind of where we're going with this. But are we good on that? Yes, sir. No, tomorrow it'll just be this. The next quiz I give you, I'll have this and I'll have the tangents, or maybe I'll just do the tangents. We might just do the tangents on the next one. I mean, it's easy, right? Hopefully these should be good, easy grades for you, okay? All right, we good? All right, so then so flip it over. I want you to not be able to look at that. Don't get ahead of me because we're not filling out everything you might think we're filling out here. We are going to put in the angle measures, so go ahead and put your angles in radians. Remember, we don't care about degrees anymore. The only reason we'll talk about 30, 60, and 45, again, is just so you have an idea of where they go. I just think that's helpful. But so fill those in. Oh, we're still on the purple paper. Sorry. We're still on the purple paper. You should have one more of these. It's on the side with the hand, yeah. Okay, now we're going to ignore the ordered pair things there, okay, because I changed my mind after I printed them. And without looking at anything, I know we only talked about tangent a teeny tiny bit yesterday, and I'm going to lead you through this, but before I do that, without looking at your neighbors or anything else where you have it written down, and you can just write them next to the ordered pairs or above it, whatever. But I want you to write in as many tangent values as you think you can. And if you're wrong, we can change them. It's fine. But see what you can get out of your little brains before I give you any hints and lead you through things. And it's okay if it's none of them, because you're like, we talked about it very briefly and whatever. Just see what you can get out of your brain first. But what I don't want you to do is to have to write down math to figure it out right now. If you do some like stuff in your brain, that's fine, but the whole working it out like we did yesterday, not what I want you to do right now, okay? All right, so the working it out in your brain part, and there's a reason that I didn't have you write in these ordered pairs, because they're not always going to be written out for you. Most of the time, you're not going to have this stuff written out, and you want to be able to get it out of your brain. So if I'm going to think about up here at pi halves, even though it's not written for me, I know that that ordered pair is 0, 1. And I know that tangent is sine over cosine or y over x. So if I put 1 over 0, what does that give me? Undefined. Okay. And then if I think about down here at 0, my ordered pair is 1, 0. When I put 0 over 1, what does that give me? 0. Now, this next question is a matter of opinion, but what's the next easiest tangent value, do you think? 1, right? And that goes with what angle? Pi fourths. And that's because the x and the y value here are the same. So when you make a fraction out of them, you get 1. Now, the other two values, and I'm not asking what order or which ones they actually are. What are the other two numbers? Square root of 3 and square root of 3 over 3, right? And so then I just have to remember where they go, which, again, there's multiple ways. Personally, what happens in my brain is that the pi thirds goes with the square root of 3 because there's just 1 3. Pi 6, it takes 2 3s to get to a 6, so that's square root of 3 over 3. Okay? But what I gave you yesterday was also a sentence that could help you, right? You are one really overwhelming third wheel. And if that's how you remember it, whatever works for you. Okay? We good on that? Any questions at all? All right, back to your pink paper. And we are going to look at, once I find it, here we go. This blank side here. And again, so you should have one blank full circle left. Don't get ahead of me, because again, we're not going to write everything you might think we're going to write. We will start with our quadrantal angles. So this is 0. What is this one? Pi halves. What is this? Pi, good. And what is this one? 3 pi halves, good. All right. So then go ahead and fill in the other 3 angles that go in the first quadrant. Just the first quadrant. Okay. And again, we should be experts at those, yes? All right, so then together we're going to do the rest of the pi sixths angles. Remember that there's one of each angle in each quadrant. So I have a second quadrant pi sixth angle, a third quadrant. So when I'm thinking fractionally, pi becomes 6 pi sixths. When I back up 1, what do I get? 5 pi sixths, which means that my third quadrant pi sixth angle is what? 7 pi sixths. Good. Okay, do we understand the backing up and coming forward part of that, right? Then when I go all the way, so this was 0, we can put 0, 2 pi, because it's really both. It's also 4 pi, 6 pi, whatever. But when I get to 2 pi, and I'm thinking in sixths, how many pi sixths is that? 12, which means my fourth quadrant pi sixth angle is what? 11 pi 6. Okay, everybody good with that? Now I'm going to give you a minute. I want you on your own, from your own little brain, to try and fill, without copying from anything else or anybody, try to fill in as many of the rest of the angles as you can. And then after you've worked on it a while, I'll throw out some little hints there that might be helpful, but I want to see what you can get done at this point. And I'm going to do mine off camera. All right, so I'm going to throw out one little hint here. If the whole thinking fractionally thing is not necessarily working for you, remember that in the second quadrant, if we ignore the pi's, all of the numerators are 1 less than the denominator. And in the third quadrant, if I ignore the pi's, all of the numerators are 1 more than the denominator. So that's one little pattern that could help you there. All right. And remember, all of your pi sixths angles closest to the x-axis, all of your pi thirds closest to the y-axis, all of your pi fourths right in the middle there of each quadrant. Okay, so let's check ourselves and let's see how we did. Feeling pretty good about that? Hopefully. And if you just think about the patterns, you look at the reflections, overall it's not that big of a deal. Now, again, here's like the thought process, and we're still going to focus mainly on the third quadrant. I'm just going to talk you through what you do when you're looking for like the cosine of 4 pi thirds. Here's the things we have to think about. 4 pi thirds, well, clearly that's a pi thirds angle. So you can use your hand trick. Here's pi thirds. If I want the cosine, that makes it 1/2, right? So I know it's 1/2. It's either 1/2 or negative 1/2. So then 4 pi thirds, I have to know is in the third quadrant. And since it's in the third quadrant, both sine and cosine are both negative. So that means the cosine of 4 pi thirds is negative 1/2, right? And figuring out what quadrant we're in should get easier and easier, especially if you think, if it's a sixth, you go 6 pi 6. Is it less or more? 4 pi fourths, and go back and forth like that. That should help you, okay? What questions we got? All right, so once again, without looking at anything or talking to anybody, I want you on the outside right here to write just your tangent values for the first quadrant. Tangent values, first quadrant. Are we basically tangent experts now too? I think so. Okay. Now, before we do anything else, let's look at the other two quadrantals. All right. So here at 0, my tangent is 0 because the ordered pair is 1, 0. And when I put 0 over 1, I get 0. At pi, my ordered pair is negative 1, 0. So I'd put 0 over negative 1, which makes this 0. Okay. So both of the tangent values on the x-axis, because again, look, we got reflections just like we did in everything else. The ordered pair for 3 pi halves is 0, -1. Well, when I put -1 over 0, I get undefined. So both of the tangent values that are on the y-axis are undefined, again, because we have reflections. All right. Everybody good so far? All right, so just like sine and cosine, these are the only values we have to know, and then the sign, the SIGN, changes depending on, or could change depending on what quadrant we're in. So I know that every pi thirds angle will be the square root of 3. So I'm at least going to put a square root of 3 on there. We'll go back and worry about whether they're positive and negative in a minute. Every pi fourths angle, I can put a 1. Every pi sixth angle, square root of 3 over 3. Okay. So now let's go think about the SIGNs of tangent. We know in the first quadrant, every ordered pair is positive, positive, right? And we know in the second quadrant, everything is negative, positive. All this is old news. Negative, negative, positive, negative, right? That's how ordered pairs work, how they've always worked. So we already know that our tangent values in the first quadrant, I mean, they are what they are, so they're positive. In the second quadrant, remember the way we get tangent is y over x, or sine over cosine. So if I put y over x, that's positive over negative, which means what's true about these 3 values here? They're negative, so we can put a little negative sign on all of them. In the third quadrant, when we put y over x, I'm putting negative over negative, so what's true about these 3 values? They're positive. Fourth quadrant, I put negative over positive, so these 3 are what? Negative. Okay. So again, there are multiple ways to remember what's positive and what's negative where. Understanding how ordered pairs work is definitely a plus. I think when we're doing sine and cosine and knowing that cosine is x, sine is y, that helps you in your quadrants. With tangent, you have to think, am I putting positive over negative or whatever? But I'm going to show you another way that, again, we're just going to talk about briefly. We probably won't use for a while because we're going to focus on the first quadrant. But I think the more often you hear this stuff, the better off it is. So we're going to draw, I'm going to zoom out just a tad here. And we're going to draw a little coordinate right here. So you can see that. Okay, good deal. All right, so in the first quadrants, sine, cosine, and tangent, all 3 of them are positive because everything's positive in the first quadrant. So in my little first quadrant right here, I'm going to put a capital A. A is for all. Right? In the second quadrant, we know that tangent is negative, cosine is negative, sine is positive, right? So what we're writing in here is which trig functions of the main 3 are positive. So in the second quadrant, the only one of those 3 that's positive is sine, so we're going to put an S there. In the third quadrant, sine and cosine are both negative, but tangent is positive, so we're going to put a T here. Fourth quadrant, cosine's positive, sine's negative, tangent's negative, so we're going to put a C here for cosine. So remember, these 4 letters represent what of the 3 trig functions are positive. All of them, sine, tangent, cosine. So when I ask you for the cosine of 4 pi thirds, and you go, okay, I know it's a 1/2. 4 pi thirds is in the third quadrant. The only thing positive in the third quadrant is tangent, which means the cosine is -1/2. There's like those little steps that go through your brain, right? And the more you do it, the quicker those little thoughts go. So to remember this order, here's a little sentence for this. All students take calculus. You start in the first quadrant, go around. All students take calculus. That's how you remember what's positive in what quadrant. Okay? Does that make sense to you? All right, so again, I'm giving you like a little bit more information than I'm going to make you responsible for right this second, but I'm going to be adding in little extra things. Just like today at the door, I only asked you either sine or cosine of pi 6 or pi thirds. That was it. So tomorrow I'll add in some of the other sines and cosines, then I'll start adding tangent. We'll just kind of build as we go once I feel like we all kind of have it down. Remember, if you don't quite get the hand trick, that's fine. That's why I made everybody show me their hand at the door. And if you don't use the hand trick because you have another way, that's totally fine. But if you have no clue what's going on, I'm going to make you use the hand trick. And if you don't understand it, let me know. I will re-explain it 1,000 times until you get it. All right? What questions do we have? We good? Okay. So now what you're going to do is you're going to go to quizzes.com. Let me get the thing back up there so you can spell it right. I know most of you have probably used quizzes, but maybe not all of you. And you don't need a code. I have loaded you in there from Google Classroom. So you just sign in with Google, all right? There are 2 quizzes in there. One of them is first quadrant, sine, cosine, and tangent. And the other one is the quadrantals, okay? Just the 4 corners, basically. These are, it's not like a live quizzes, like a competition. It's, I guess, more like an assignment, but you can do it an unlimited amount of times. When you do it, I want you to do it without looking at your notes. Do it from your brain. If it's embarrassingly bad the first time, that's fine. Do it again, okay? And even after you make 100, I'm going to leave that stuff in there, and when you feel like you need to go practice, you can go do it again, all right? Once you have gotten enough practice today on that, you've done it once or twice, maybe it's perfect the first time, then you need to work on your Delta Math, because most of us have not made a strong start to the semester like we vowed to do last week, and it's kind of sad.